Okay, so picking up where we left off before, we're back into the nervous system. We'll come up forward. Come on, up you come. There it is. So, as those who've done psych already and done some biology earlier in their year 7 to 10 course, should be able to recognise the diagram on the right or the left, whatever side. I'm looking at it on my right. And we've got the brain there, with the brain stem joining the spinal cord. So down the middle of the body, we see our central nervous system. Then branching out from that is what's called the peripheral nervous system. So the central nervous system is really about processing information. Lots of memory, especially in our brains. We have the ability to remember things, to learn from those experiences and that response to other information in the past, and essentially controls how our body responds to internal and external environmental cues, to stimuli. So essentially the peripheral system is about taking information from the receptors, those receiving stimuli, taking that information into the central nervous system, deciding whether a response is required, and then sending information back out via the peripheral system to glands and muscles to cause a change, whatever that might be. One of the things the examiners like you to know is that nerve responses are fast, but they're short-lived. So if a stimulus requires a quick response, then the nervous system is going to deal with it. They're short-lived. We had this long conversation the other day in class about because of the impact of an enzyme which destroys the neurotransmitter. Excuse me. So from one neuron to the next, we move from the axon ending into the dendrite, the next neuron, and there's a gap, a synaptic cleft. Across that synaptic cleft, we have a space for neurotransmitters to move. And that neurotransmitter is received on the other side, and the message then gets sent along the second nerve. When that neurotransmitter is released by the second nerve, by the dendrite, it needs to be destroyed. And there are a number of pathways for dealing with that. They can be recycled too. But essentially, they have to be removed from the synaptic cleft, otherwise it keeps sending the message. And we talked about Parkinson's disease, and that's one of the areas of great interest in Parkinson's is what's going on in that synaptic cleft. Is it in fact a lack of an enzyme? Is there something else happening that causes a nerve message to be repeatedly sent and cause those shakes that we see characteristically of Parkinson's sufferers? One of the other interesting things is that the synaptic cleft is entirely engulfed in glial cells, in myelin. And so those glial cells, in fact, are now being studied because they have quite an influence over what goes on. They communicate with nerves, they communicate between glial cells, and they can interfere with the communication between nerves. So they're becoming quite an interesting area of study, but not for your exam. And then we have the endocrine system. And the endocrine system is a series of glands and again, receptor organs. So the control of the endocrine system is held within the brain, hypothalamus. And you'll see that in the brain there we have the hypothalamus right in the core of the brain, with the pituitary gland and the pineal glands located beside it. So those three glands are really tightly associated with responses to the environment, because it's all the information is coming into the brain. They then release hormones that can act on the other glands that we see in our picture there. So thyroid, parathyroid, thymus, stomach, pancreas, kidneys, adrenal glands, all these things, of course, and ovaries and testes. All these things make other hormones, a range of them, of course. We've got all sorts of things being made there. And I gave you that, I sent that handout to you with all the different human hormones that we make and what they do. The important thing to remember is that when a hormone arrives at a target cell, the target cell needs the correct receptor site. So the hormone, of course, is a protein. It has a particular structure and an active site. That active site needs to find the receptor site on the cell surface or within the cell. We'll talk about that today. For the message to be sent on. So we're looking at specific receptors. So specificity is one of those things that the examiners love you to be able to talk about. And the other thing, of course, is that hormones are slow moving. They have to move through the blood system. So they take much longer than a nerve does. Not necessarily a long time, but much longer than nerves. And because of the way they're manufactured and moved around the body, their impact tends to be felt for longer. And so diabetes is one we talk about a lot, and the control of blood glucose. It's interesting because it uses both nerves and hormones. So the nerve is stimulated by the information that glucose is either falling or rising, and the pancreas is then stimulated to produce either glucagon or insulin, but then they act slowly through the blood system. So it's an interesting case study, and often appears in your exam, of course, for that very reason. Homeostasis is, of course, at its most finely evolved in mammals and also in birds. Because we live on land, we don't live in water, so we have greater need to control what goes on and greater need to keep our internal environment wet. So water maintenance is a major issue. So you tend to see much more developed and evolved processes and organ systems in mammals and birds. We talked about glucose and nausea. I'll let one go now. Plants, of course, also need to respond to the environment, and we'll talk more about that in the next chapter as well. And you have done some of this last year. Excuse me, itchy nose. So they need to be able to regulate their internal environments, but they're hamstrung in the fact they can't move around. So things like water are a real issue for them. So the classic study in plants is in fact water. They draw water up from their root system. That water evaporates from the surface of the leaves. So we have this transpiration system moving water through a plant. And of course things that dissolve in the water also move through the plant. And that relies on stomata being left open for water vapor to go to the surface of the leaf and be evaporated. However, if water's in poor supply, then the plant needs to control how much water it can lose. And so it will actually close those stomata. And the guard cells lose their the water from in their vacuoles and become less turgid, they become flaccid, and so they go from being open to being closed. So as they become flaccid, it collapses and closes. That saves water, but it stops photosynthesis and often cellular respiration from occurring. So there's a real balance to the plants. So plants have evolved a huge range of adaptations to control water loss, and you will have talked about those in year 11. Because I just done the stomata, and I just talked stomata already. But you can see that diagram there. The stomata has a thickened inside surface. So sorry, the guard cell, two guard cells have formed together. The interior of that stomata, the pore, we find this thickening of the wall of the guard cell. So if the guard cells, if the vacuoles are full of water, then they expand and put pressure on the cell wall, and it has to buckle outwards because of that thickened interior. As they collapse, then that gap closes too. And we'll talk more about that in the next chapter also. So that's a quick overview of nerves and endocrine, and I'll have to do number 6 for us over the weekend. Oops, that didn't work.